Store, and several Henry War. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is October 12th, 2020. And on this date in history, uh, 528 years ago today, Christopher Columbus accidentally ended up in the New World and discovering a land with between 50 and 74 million people. Yeah, so really we have no idea how many people were over here. But he discovered a land where a bunch of people were anyway. Also, yesterday on the 11th was my sister's anniversary. Happy birthday, sis. She married one of my former students, Chad, and they have two children. They're pretty happy.
By the way, I need to correct something on that last part. It's actually my sister's anniversary, okay? Not her birthday. So I'd like to apologize to everyone that's ever lived ever in the history of any time in the past. So, anyway, let's talk about the Mogul Empire, okay? The Mogul Empire, it was conquered or really ruled by Akbar, and he expanded the empire to its largest extent, going back 2,000 years. So he did this, and well, anyway, before this, you have the arrival of the Portuguese. The Portuguese go and they will arrive actually near where Calcutta is today. Calcutta will be first visited by the Portuguese, then eventually conquered by the British, and the British will rename it. And then once India takes it back from the British, they will they'll change the name again. Anyway, uh, so the Mughal Empire starts to fall apart whenever it's attracting people from England, France, and Holland. Surat is the trading empire that started by the British. This is before the British East India Tea Company also will come and do a lot of damage in this area. I guess that's the nice way of saying something awful that they're doing. Again, the British would name this Fort William, and later on India they would rename it Calcutta, and this is the Bay of Bengal. Okay, also if you want some fun, here's some Dutch settlements right in here. If you're looking for some French, there's a French right there, pop, pop, pop. And then here's some early English settlements before they move up into Calcutta. Okay, in China, you still had the Ming Dynasty that had been ruling. They've been ruling for the better part of about 300 years, uh, and they had extended Chinese territory into Mongolia, into Central Asia, and also into Vietnam. They built the Great Wall up to be a stronger deterrent for people to invade, and everything was going really well until Li Zicheng starts a revolution, and the emperor, rather than being captured or becoming a lapdog, will kill himself using suicide. Okay, so this is going to be followed by the Qing dynasty that lasts for almost 300 years. Okay, uh, basically they crippled the economy of Manchu China, and Russian traders started coming overland. Europe follows also, and basically takes control of China in a short period of time. Japan, there was a much different thing going on there. Japan was pretty isolated as it was. And a shogun by the name of Tokugawa Ieyasu, he restored central authority until 1868, whenever the United States will start pushing in, and so will other territories. Uh, the Portuguese initiated trade with uh, with Japan in 1543. They start introducing things like glasses, clocks, and tobacco, and European firearms. Okay, Eventually, missionaries will shut down the borders of Japan because they were interfering with their local politics. Okay, uh, you can see over here where people from Portugal are landing in Nagasaki. Okay, there's Nagasaki right there. If you're ever wondering where Nagasaki was, okay, so there's your Nagasaki. Okay, Saint Francis Xavier. He's a Jesuit priest who brought Christianity into India, Indonesia, and Japan in 1549. Okay, we're kind of moving into a little talk about Asia because, well, we always talk about things from the other end, but we don't always look at how it affects the people uh, that really don't want the presence of Europe. Okay, so let's talk about Henry Hudson. Henry Hudson was a Dutch explorer, okay? And you've got to remember, you have to remember that when we talk about the Dutch, we're talking about Holland. That's the same country. And the people there, honestly, they should be called either, like Netherlanders or Hollanders, but instead they're called the Dutch. So all these people are the same people. And Henry Hudson goes exploring for them. Okay. The first place that he hits is going to be over, well, in the New World anyway, is right by New York. He finds a river, and this river is named for him. It's the Hudson River. Okay. Then he moves up further north, and he goes up into the freezing waters of Canada, through the Hudson Strait into Hudson Bay. And if you're thinking that you're not hearing the word Hudson enough through all of this, I think you just need to hear me say Hudson one more time. So whenever he tries to think of a name for this land, he's like, what should I call it? I know, I'm going to call it New Netherland because I'm putting no effort into naming anything. Oh, wait, that's the name of all of this? What do I call my capital city? Well, how about New Amsterdam? Let's just be super lazy and just put new in front of the name of your country and the capital city. It's like going somewhere else, and where are you? This is going to be New United States. I'm going to make smaller things called states, so this is New Texas, and that city over there is called New Duncanville. What a beating. Come on, people. Come up with a better name than that. Okay? Like the Dugdalian Empire, Dugdaleville. You know? Let's put some punch into it. Put your name in there, but get creative with it. Don't just call it like after Marcus Duncan, who came here 173 years ago to form a uh, a Methodist community with his family, uh, his new family, because his old family was actually killed during one of the early skirmishes between the Canadians and the Americans up in Nova Scotia right before Maine became a state. By the way, everything I just said was off the top of my head, and it was a lie about you know the people about the founding of Duncanville. Anyway, that was much more interesting, though. I think we should change the history to that. Anyway, so anyone could buy land there in New Amsterdam. Eventually, the English are going to think, wait a minute, these Dutch could end up becoming a threat to us, so why don't we do this? Why don't we overthrow them? So the Dutch put out Peter Stuyvesant to mount this big defense against the English, and King Charles' navy and landing forces, his army just goes through and just flattens Peter Stuyvesant and his forces. He ends up giving the land to his brother, James II. And James II, who's the Duke of York, he's like, what should I name this? Should I call this like Jimmytown or Jamesville? Or should I name it after my father, Charles the First? Wait, no, let's just call it New York instead of, since I'm the Duke of York. Later on, James II would become the king of uh, of England, and he would be in power a full 3 years before his daughter comes in and overthrows him and basically chases him to France. Bad Daddy. Okay, so let's talk about some changes in social structures in Europe. Okay, you have this middle class that's bourgeoisie or burghers. Bourgeoisie is French and burghers is German. They're middle class people who have acquired a large amount of wealth. They live in towns as physicians, as clergy, as attorneys, and merchants. Okay, so they built a great amount of wealth. So France takes advantage of this, and they have a group. They have a tax called the Paulette, and you can pay this tax to become a noble. Okay, then you get all the privileges, and you don't have to pay taxes once you become a noble. Okay, they had a similar group in England called the gentry. These are wealthy landowners that weren't nobility. Now, these wealthy landowners would make the majority of their money by renting out their land to normal English citizens and charging them ridiculous rent, where they continue to be wealthy, while the people renting the land would live at about a subsistence level. Uh, anyway, so it wasn't really good for them, but it was good for the gentry. In Russia, meanwhile, when they could be doing the same type of things, the majority of people there are in a extreme level of poverty, barely surviving, and so Russia really is about 400 years behind the rest of Europe. So every time Europe does something, you need to wait about 400 years to see Russia do the same thing. That will change in the 1940s and 50s when they are forced to modernize at gunpoint, but then they kind of slip into some of their old tricks as well. Uh, the working poor, most of the people that worked in the major cities in Europe were really living in an extreme level of poverty, living in shacks and shanty towns, doing really hard manual labor, working in ships, unloading them, doing domestic service, or begging. Okay, so this is the main job of people living in the major cities, was barely getting by and being worked really to death. Uh, your lifespan, if you're living in the city, is going to be about 40 to 45 years old. So, you know, I'm basically about as old as you would get in the city. By the way, right now I'm being visited by George, so if you wonder what's going on, my good old puppy dog George is here. By old, I mean he's not even a year and a half old. He's very cute, very sweet. The deserving poor, the people that were allowed to beg or receive charity, uh, were the disabled, the elderly, and the children. Okay. Britain also, or England also had what was called a Poor Law of 1601, and this is where they would have charity for the deserving poor. But if you were someone who was not deserving, so you're an able bodied person, you're not elderly, and you're not a child, then they would punish you. Sometimes they would execute people for just common property crimes. You might steal something. Okay, so there's no police forces, there's no prisons. So basically, the mob sees you doing something wrong, they will take you out, tear you to pieces in the streets, and you will die violently, screaming and clutching at your body as your intestines have been torn out and thrown off of a cliff. I don't know. Anyway, okay, so let's move to the French and let's look at some ugly people. Okay, uh, so basically in France they're having their religious wars. Okay, the French wars of religion. Now the two major religions there are Catholicism and Calvinism. Okay, Calvinism we already talked about that originated in Geneva, Switzerland, and now has spread into France. So this group of Calvinists are called Huguenots, and they're really influenced by John Calvin. They're really French Calvinists, so Huguenots just love that term. Okay, the Bourbons were Huguenots, and they ruled Navarre, and they were next in line for the throne. Navarre, by the way, is really close to Spain, and part of it spills into Spain. Okay, so Henry the Fourth of Navarre, a Huguenot, was in line for the throne. So next up to be the king. Okay, so there were several rumors about him, and forcing everyone in the country to become a Huguenot. And 10,000 Protestants were killed in the streets in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre during his wedding. Okay, so Henry the Fourth of Navarre is going to convert to Catholicism to get support. And once he, basically so he can take the throne, he becomes Catholic. Then as soon as he becomes a king, he decides, you know what? I'm still a Calvinist. So take that, everybody. Take that, all you Catholics who killed all my friends and supporters. And look, he was kind of quite ugly. Not a handsome man, but man, that's a lot of hair. Anyway, I'm sorry. Okay, so then this is going to come to the War of the Three Henrys. Okay, so Henry Guise is the leader, or actually, I'm sorry I butchered this all this time. It's actually in France, it's pronounced Henri. So Henri Guise is the leader of the Ultra Catholics and controlled Paris. Okay, so now I'm going back to Henry III, and this is leading to how Henry IV kind of becomes the heir. Okay, so Henry III was king of France, and a monk kills him. Okay, so Henry IV. Okay, wait, just a minute here. Okay, so Henry IV and Henry III, before Henry IV becomes king, they meet together because Henry Guise, or Henri the Fourth and Henri the Third. I'm just going to call him Henry, so you know who I'm talking about. They have Henry Guise killed during a peace talks. So they bring in Henry Guise to talk. He's in charge of Paris. Okay, so even though Henry the Third is the king, Henry Guise, and sorry, all the Henrys here kind of make this confusing to talk about. So Henry Guise is brought in to talk to him to try and come up with peace, so people don't have to die and Christians can learn how to live in harmony in France. So when Henry Guise comes to the meeting, Henry the Third has Henry Guise killed. Following the murder of Henry Guise by Henry the Third, a monk will kill Henry the Third for killing Henry Guise under the pretense of peace talks. It's something you're not supposed to do, and doing that is supposed to be bad luck, which your murder is very, very bad luck. This is when Henry the Fourth becomes king, and he converts to Catholicism. Okay, and when he takes over, he makes Catholicism the official religion, but he makes sure that he gives Huguenots rights, and then eventually he will recant and continue to practice Calvinism. Sorry that I bumbled up the slide so much. So, to recap, Henry Guise was in charge of this right wing group of Catholics that thought you need to become even more Catholic, and they were in charge of Paris. Henry III was the king of France. He invites Henry Guise to a meeting with him and his successor Henry IV, and they're trying to come to some solution to make France safe for everyone. And then Henry Guise is killed by Henry III. Then a monk kills Henry III, and Henry IV is in charge. And so the Edict of Nantes makes Catholicism the official religion, but you can also practice the Calvinist faith through as a Huguenot. Okay, now let's move on to King Philip II. Okay, so Philip II is going to take over after his father, and I know you're probably thinking, yes, his father Philip I. No, his father Charles V. But Charles V's father, no, no, don't try and follow these numbers and think that you can figure out who's whose father. Okay. So anyway, so Spain really wanted to force Catholicism down everyone's throat. Okay, so they form a holy league against the Turks, and they challenge them in battle. Okay, the same people that had conquered the Ottoman Empire. Okay, and they go into the largest naval battle in the world at that point, called the Battle of Lepanto, and they win. Among the people that fought in this war was a infamous Miguel Cervantes, who wrote El Cid, one of the most important. Wait, did you really just let me get away with El Cid? Do people not read? Come on. Miguel Cervantes wrote Don Quixote. Anyway, so from that point, they had the most powerful navy in the world. Okay, so Spain, at the time of Philip's death, or whenever his reign ended, they had the most populous empire in the world. Now, a lot of those weren't Spanish people by birth, but people that became Spanish through conquest. But they didn't have the ability to maintain such a large empire. And it's going to fall apart over the next, well, by 1821 or 1824, they lose all their empires. And really, they're not involved in any major wars shortly thereafter, and there are struggles over who's going to be in charge of Spain. Okay? Uh, they talented some of their well, they persecuted some of their most talented people, a group of Muslims that had been doing all of the important trades on the Iberian Peninsula for about 800 years. And they chased them out. They're called Moriscos. Okay. And they were charging high taxes. And it's a type of thing that just fragmented Spanish society. So instead of being a united, powerful people, the taxation kind of and the way that they treated people on the peninsula made them lose a lot of important support. That brings us to the end of today and the end of this unit. I know you're all excited to know that we're going to have a test in 2 days, but try not to dance in the streets too much because you need to be ready for that test. Everyone have a great night, and good luck, and I'll see you soon. And that was my wife that just said that. Say hi, baby. Hi. She didn't realize I hadn't hit